Chapter 23. Stasi. Not wanting to repeat the depressing journey we had made through Berlin in 1966, we had decided that this time we would travel via Hanover. This journey turned out to be somewhat more pleasant than our previous trip, added to which we were fully prepared for the absence of food and drink available at stations. As well as sandwiches and drinks, we armed ourselves with plenty of fresh fruit, well aware that any left over from our travels would be eagerly devoured by any of our East German family and friends. The crossing from west to east was once more characterized by everyone being locked into the train, while groups of armed border guards with granite faces came into every compartment, checking passports and visas, and inspecting some of the passengers' luggage. For all that my heart and thoughts were elsewhere, it was wonderful to see Hans again. This time, when he met us from the station, he seemed a little uneasy, and we were soon to find out why. The authorities, he told Mum, were interested in us because we had travelled independently into East Germany on 2 occasions. They were going to pick us up by car and show us the sights of Dresden for 3 consecutive days as honoured guests. When he felt it was safe to do so, he warned Mum to be careful what she said to our escorts, as he could be in serious trouble if she said the wrong thing. He warned that a lot of questions would be asked, and she should be constantly on her guard. They want to be sure you are sympathetic to our government. I'm not sure if Mum was really aware of the seriousness of the danger to Hans's family or the dreadful consequences of saying the wrong thing. She still believed that up to a point a lot of what we were told in the West was capitalist propaganda. She never discussed it with us years later, after all the truth about the Stasi came out. By that time, Hans had died, and perhaps she didn't want to think too deeply about what kind of life Hans and his family had endured under this regime he had always supported, or how having relatives in the West might have impacted on his career. The day came when a big black limousine drew up outside Hans's flat. 3 men in black suits arrived, dark blots staining the happy mood of the bright apartment. Everyone was terribly polite. Introductions were made, hands shaken. Ruth, in her light summer dress, looked as small as a child beside these imposing officials. Then, with Hans looking anxiously after us, Mum, Miranda and I were ushered into a car far more luxurious than anything we had ever experienced before. As we drove through the streets of Dresden, the citizens, who drove flimsy Duroplast Trabants, knew exactly who this car belonged to, and either stared or averted their eyes as we drove past. Perhaps it was fortunate for Miranda and me that none of those men spoke English, although it made the whole experience rather boring for us. Of course, they might have understood English, but Miranda and I remained silent unless Mum was explaining something to us, so there was nothing for them to hear. They certainly treated us well, taking us to all the interesting places, showing off the city. But these were places Hans had already shown us on our first visit, and seeing them with him had been a much happier and more relaxed experience. Between the explanations of what we were seeing, which Mum had to translate for us, there were the endless questions. It was obvious that these questions were the most important part of those 3 days, and Mum became quite stressed. Between having to translate for us and be constantly on alert to what exactly they were asking, what was underlying their questions, she became exhausted. Although she had the ability to wheedle a smile out of almost anyone with her flirtatious ways, our escorts rarely smiled, and when they did, it almost seemed to cause them pain. In the end, she couldn't resist one little dig at the system. "We love it here. We like coming, but what I don't understand is that although we can come here and be my brother's guests, I can't invite him back to have a holiday with us in England. Why can't I?" They shrugged and brushed off her question. They were not there to answer questions, only to ask them. While all the mistrust of the Cold War existed, so would the barriers stopping free travel for people who lived behind the Iron Curtain. There was one place to which they took us that I particularly remember, mainly because of the sinister atmosphere created by these men. We drove up to a fine restaurant called Luisenhof for Kaffee und Kuchen. It was perched on a rock high above the Elbe in the elegant district of Loschwitz. The management was clearly expecting us and made sure that we had a table with the best view over Dresden. I was conscious that we were being watched in a not too friendly fashion, both by the staff and by people eating at other tables. There was an undercurrent of fear and disgust throughout the restaurant. I felt that by being in the company of these men, we were being identified with them and with what it was they stood for. Everyone was very attentive, but scurried away from our table as soon as we were served. I left that restaurant with some sense of relief. I just longed for these 3 days to be over and the rest of our holiday to begin. I knew I couldn't even write about this to John. It was not the kind of thing that could be put in a letter from the Soviet zone, where letters to destinations abroad were more than likely opened and censored. I didn't know much about the Stasi then, the East German secret police, but looking back it is clear to me that this is who these men in black were, and in retrospect I can understand how worried Hans must have been. Perhaps Marianne and his children even resented their visitors from the West who brought their family to the attention of the Stasi. When 2 weeks were up, Miranda and I left on our own. Mum was going to stay an extra week and have some time alone with her brother and Lilo to enjoy their company without the need to translate all the time. This time crossing the border back into the West came with such a surge of relief that we knew our experience with the Stasi had left its mark. We had to spend one night in Hanover with only a few Deutschmarks left in our purses. Having booked into a hostel, we walked around the streets wondering what to do. Compared with the order and quiet streets of Dresden, we found Hanover at night a frightening place filled with aggressive yobs and with graffiti everywhere. "So much for the West," Miranda remarked in disgust. We found a shop still open that had baskets of ripe strawberries in the window. After our fruit-free fortnight, we looked longingly at the luscious display and then at the price. Searching through our few coins, we found that we had just enough. No strawberries ever tasted as good as those ones we shared that night. We went back to a restless sleep, disturbed by the drunks of Hanover, longing for the morning when we could get away.